The Alienist aired the last 2 episodes of its 2nd season, Angel of Darkness last night, Last Exit to Brooklyn, and Better Angels. I have thoughts, with spoilers. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing, and if you'd give me a like, I'd really appreciate it. So, I thought that this season really landed the plane quite well. I thought they did a really good job making the last 2 episodes exciting and giving just the right amount of closure while leaving the door open for future entries. I like there to be more seasons of shows like this, but I don't like it when they're so dependent on a future season that they don't fill out the season that you're currently in. And I was glad that they kind of seemed to view this as a chapter in a larger story that was kind of close-ended. And some of this stuff, if it's the final season of The Alienist that we get, which I don't necessarily think it will be, I think there's a good possibility we'll get a 3rd season since there are more books by Carr. But if it is the last season we get, I think that things ended in a decent way and it was relatively satisfying compared to a lot of shows. And that's really all you can ask for from your television these days. I felt that these 2 episodes benefited from bringing the trio, the original trio from the 1st season together more often, and from enforcing Laszlo's importance to the story. Up to this point, he had been so peripheral as to almost not matter. I also liked that they made Sarah such a strong female character that did contribute to the story. She wasn't just a damsel in distress. She had things to contribute, but they didn't do it at the expense of the male characters. They allowed them to coexist and to complement each other as they investigated the story, and they all had a role to play, which I really thought was well done. Laszlo, as I said, I felt like reintegrating him into the story more in these last 2 episodes was a good decision. He obviously was able to make some deductions about Libby's mother and what had actually gone on between the daughter and her mother in the past. Now, I felt some of these deductions seemed a little bit jumping to conclusions, but he was right, so when you're right, you can't really question people and how they came to be so certain about things. But I liked his dynamic with Sarah quite a bit in these last 2 episodes. I felt like it had a more natural dynamic than her dynamic with John, although I liked that dynamic as well, but I felt that because these 2 weren't burdened with a melodramatic romantic subplot, they could just coexist as partners in this investigation. And obviously I think that they have very, very different strengths. I think Laszlo is a genius in his own way, but he's very unequipped to make observations about people and to understand people's struggles on a more intimate level, and I think that Sarah is much better equipped to handle those aspects. And the way that she handled Rosy McEwen's Libby and the way that they brought that relationship background was very, very well done. It's interesting. Will Laszlo be back? This season ended with him heading off to see Freud with Karen Stratton. So it's possible that this is their way of writing him out of the show if they need to. I tend to think that they would bring him back if he was available. But alternatively, they could bring in another alienist to play whatever role he played in the books, or they could have Karen Stratton return to fill in for him, seeing as this show has become very focused on female characters in its 2nd season. I found it odd that Dr. Marco was entirely absent from the proceedings in these 2 episodes. I felt like there needed to be more closure with his character. He basically seemed to get away with what he was doing, but I guess you could argue that that's real life. I liked the dynamic between John and Sarah in these 2 episodes. I liked that they allowed them both to be strong characters. Obviously, I think Sarah was taking the lead, but John was not a damsel in distress any more than Sarah was, and I appreciated that. For instance, in the end of the episode Last Exit to Brooklyn, when Libby showed up in Sarah's office, that scene, the way they handled it, having both John and Sarah contribute to defeating Libby and to capturing her, I thought that was well done, and they allowed them both to rescue the other at different points. They were both working to save each other's lives instead of it being a one-dimensional, one being the victim and the other being the hero who saves the day. I thought that was well done. I liked the themes that they explored of John wanting a family and wanting a more traditional wife. Now, ultimately, I think that this show has set us up to believe that he will not ultimately be happy with Violet, although perhaps having a son who he will be able to see his brother in, perhaps that will be enough for him. But I did find this a rather melancholy end to these two characters' relationship. Violet just reminded me of Idina Menzel's character in Enchanted, where she just did not seem like a good fit for John to me, and I find it troubling that they left the storyline this way. Now, obviously, in the present, if you get someone pregnant, you know, we live in a more tolerant society where the pregnant woman could go on with her life and John would go on with his life, and that would probably have been the better thing for both of them, because I tend to think that we've already seen in this show how being trapped in a loveless marriage or in a marriage where the partner is not cherished can work out. But hopefully John is gentlemanly enough to treat his wife with the love and respect that she deserves, even if she might not be the partner that he wanted. Sarah and Libby, as I said, their dynamic played out in very, very interesting ways. I liked the scene between them in the jail cell where Sarah was able to exploit the connection she had with Libby to get her to tell Sarah where the baby was so that they could rescue it. I thought that they had played up this connection enough throughout the series that it made sense. And it made sense because Sarah has always viewed Libby as a human being and has viewed her with sympathy and not just as this crazy evil woman as some of the others have been tempted to view her. The scene was funny because Sarah at the end of the scene leans forward to hear what Libby has to say, and we had just seen Libby bite the ear off of the police officer who leaned forward to hear what she had to say. So there was definitely some tension in this entire scene that Libby could enact violence on Sarah. So very, very well done scene and very, very intense, but also moving in a way. I found Rosy McEwen's Libby to be a very, very compelling villain, not the least of which because she's not really a villain. You feel that she's as much sinned against as a sinner, and you can understand why she ended up the way she did, especially once we find out what her mother did to her in the past. And I see a bright future ahead for Rosy McEwen. She gave off a lot of Nicole Kidman vibes to me. She's a very pale beauty, very, very strong, but also very, very feminine. So I think that she played this part really well. You could see her as being crazy, but you also felt this sympathy for her. She very much humanized the character. And she also was able to play up a lot of the campy and more theatrical moments, which made the character entertaining. So very well done, very compelling villain. Barnes this episode got a measure of redemption. He's been very, very much a mustache-twirling villain all season, and he had some moments like this episode where he's lighting up his cigar while the policemen are beating the duster who came to inform to him. The scene, where he's torturing Libby in the jail cell, these were obviously very much in keeping with his rather harsh and oppressive way of doing things, as John and Sarah discussed at one point in the last exit to Brooklyn. But I felt they also gave him a measure of redemption in that he was allowed to grow in his understanding of what Laszlo is trying to do. And you see this growth first in the scene where he sees Laszlo break down Libby's mother, and then later on when he turns the interrogation over to Laszlo and Sarah, you see that he's learned that they have something to offer and that he has come to have respect for them. And again, I think that this was a good arc for his character. He's been kind of one-dimensionally bad, and I appreciated that they gave him a little bit more to work with. The police this episode were obviously portrayed, and in this entire season were obviously portrayed rather poorly, and nobody was feeling particularly sympathy for them when the Dusters showed up and attacked the police station. That was a very, very intense scene. I kind of saw it coming after they rescued the baby so easily from the butcher's shop. I kind of felt, oh, okay, they're gonna go get Libby because Gugu is a great romantic interest. He cares deeply for Libby and he's not gonna let her go to prison. So that scene was well set up. It was very, very intense, and obviously it put Laszlo and Sarah in jeopardy, although obviously I never felt like anything was actually going to happen to them. But the thing that made the scene a little bit more intense was that we at least knew one character in the police station who had been introduced earlier in the previous episode, Last Exit to Brooklyn, so that when he died, there were stakes. It was not just completely anonymous policemen being killed. And obviously, it was good to get Libby set free again so that we could once more have her pose a threat. And again, the end of the episode with the Gothic mansion, I found this ending a little bit contrived and unconvincing, especially the part where Lucius kills Gugu. Obviously, he was set up to do this by the fact that Gugu had killed his brother Marcus, played by Douglas Smith. And Douglas Smith had a very compelling death scene. I think that this actor may have wanted to leave the show because I think he deserves larger roles in other things, because the way he played this death scene, you could see the resignation on his face. I knew instantly that he was going to die by the way he looked down at his wound, and he just kind of seemed resigned to the fact that he was going to die. It was a very sad scene for Lucius, but he seems to be getting some consolation from Bitsy, who was at his brother's funeral. But I didn't like that they had Lucius show up and kill Gugu. I felt like there needed to be a better end to this character. I felt that it wasn't really set up other than the fact that he had killed his brother, and it could have really been anyone who took out Gugu. I felt like they had set John more up as his opposite in the first episode when Gugu stuck the knife to John's throat. So this was kind of an odd decision, a little bit contrived and convenient. One of the few things in this episode that I didn't care for much. But the end of this episode, after Libby willingly turned herself in, let her daughter go, I felt that that was very compelling. And I felt like this was a very, very strong portrayal of this female villain. I felt like she was frightening and campy and theatrical and intimidating all at once. And they kept her in play throughout the season, which I thought was very smart. It had started to feel like no one was getting killed despite all the violent acts going on, no one of importance to the story. So I think it was important that they had Marcus die, and also the police officer that Libby killed in the alley, and the officers at the station. So they managed to create some collateral damage to add to the tension at the end of the story. So if this is the end of The Alienist, I think it went out on a fairly high note. I actually personally think this was a better season than season 1. I felt like they did a very good job of keeping the story's momentum going throughout, and I felt like it had a much stronger villain, which overall added to the tension and the interest throughout this story. But let me know what you thought in the comments. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing, and as always, you can watch more videos right now.